totally chill. Like, zipping around with Parker acting out.
So as a new reminder, no, I support, yes, well, I work for Buncombe County and I'll be sharing the community index. Just kind of helping you all navigate questions. And I have been what was your
Yeah, we did good. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. And has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? Has anyone had a chance to look at the minutes? And does anyone have any changes? And if not, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting? Motion. Second. Second, perfect. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Great. Thank you. Now we are pleased to welcome Heather Parkinson, who's going to talk about Buncombe County Community Index Map. So please, Heather.
Sure, thank you. I'm Heather Parkinson. I work in the Strategy and Innovation Department for Buncombe County. And I worked on a team that put together what we call Buncombe County's Community Index Map. So I thought what I'd do today is just walk you through an overview of what the map is, how we got there, and then potentially how you all would consider using it. So let me share my screen. Okay, so this is the overlay of Community Index Map. And what you see on the screen, you'll notice the different shades, right? The shades of darker blue out to the pale yellow. What we found is that Buncombe County overall has vastly different pockets of people that live in our community, right? So we have high income individuals and families and households. And then we have, according to it was 2022 Census Bureau data, 13.9% of Buncombe County's population is living in poverty. So vastly different. And we wanted to have a map that could kind of show us how the areas in Buncombe County vary and have a way to dive into these details. And so on the index, the dark blue indicates a high concentration of community members who might not have access to resources that they need. The resources might not be available at all, or the available resources might not align with that community's needs. Whereas the pale yellow areas that you see on the map, they are more likely to have access to the resources that they need. And there are places where the resources may better align with that area's needs. The Community Index Map also shows the identities of people living in each part of the county. So what these different shaded colors, these areas are actually census block groups. And so I don't know if you've had a chance to navigate on the map at all, but what you can do is you can click on any of these block groups, these census block groups, and it will share information regarding the population, where the ranking is, et cetera. So I'll walk you through all of those pieces.
So just a question for me, sorry.
Sure.
That first, so the map is interactive. So the different thing, but the initial map you're showing us, that's based on economic? this specific one, are the shades based on, no?
No, it's based on, and I'll walk you through it right here. So it's, we created an index. What we did is we looked at 9 census factors, and we pulled them together and created a ranking by the census block groups. And so we just went down the list and created a ranking that then sits behind all of those colors on the map. So the factors that we selected were across 4 areas. It's hard to see from here, but socioeconomic, healthcare, housing, and demographic. Socioeconomic included median household income, percent of households below poverty, percent of the population 21 and over without a high school diploma or equivalent, percent of households on SNAP or food stamps, and then healthcare. We were limited in the factors that we could and could not use. We were at the mercy of what we could pull from the American Community Survey data. But so for healthcare, we pulled percent of the population with Medicaid or that is uninsured. Housing is gross rent as a percent of income, and mortgage percent of income 30 or greater, and then demographics, those that are under 18 and over 65. So does that answer your question?
So
it's more
we'll find out. Let's keep going.
Yeah, so it's more than just economic. It includes all of these factors pulled together.
Some of these things seem unlike to me, so I'm interested. So please.
Sure. And so the additional context factors that we added in, when you navigate this map, you can bring up what looks like a little box up on the screen that shows you the ranking, total ranking, based on those 9 factors that I reviewed. But it also includes the total population in that specific block group, includes the median household income, and as well as percentage of race, ethnicity, and the family and non-family households that are living in poverty in that area. So we added in those context factors. Those are the ones that we couldn't necessarily rank and rate, but we felt that they were relevant to being able to utilize this map in a useful way. Some other components I want to point out to you all when you use the map is that there are tabs that are across the bottom. The base map starts with the community index map. That's the way that the tab is, we've labeled that tab. But the other 4 are linked to Buncombe County's 2025 strategic plan, and they are the 4 focus areas of our strategic plan. And so we thought it was a nice way to be able to hopefully make programmatic decisions that are linked to our strategic plan to move us towards achieving the goals that we set out to achieve for 2025. The other thing I wanted to point out, so I've pulled up, and this is just a screenshot, but I'll walk you through it in a minute. We have by default turned layers on and off for each of those tabs that are across the bottom. So you can turn layers on and turn them off. If you wanted to overlay the zip code layer that we have there and be able to hone in on this map by zip code, which is, I think, naturally how all of us think. We don't think of census block groups. Then you can turn on that layer and easily navigate. We also have a search feature that you can look on the left side of the menu where you can type in a zip code and zoom in that way as well. And so you can toggle these layers on and off. And then I thought I'd walk you through the layers that we have included based on consultation with county staff that support each of the strategic focus areas. So for resident well-being, the layers that we've included are around public transportation routes, recreational assets, and jail bookings. The data that we have is for 2022. And then environmental and energy stewardship includes the count of solar installations, composting sites, conservation land, and weatherization projects. And again, these are all linked to the goals that are within the strategic plan. And hopefully we can use this data to figure out what we do next. How do we achieve those goals? For educated and capable community, we included the percent of population 21 and over without a high school diploma or equivalent, percent of the population over 65, permitted daycares, and Buncombe County's library preschool outreach sites. And then vibrant economy includes the percent of the population below poverty, so you can toggle that layer on and off, along with areas not served by broadband and septic complaints. So I thought I would navigate over to the map unless there are any questions as of right now. Or anything else I've skimmed over too fast.
So as you navigate through this, I can't see that long. So are there definitions to what you're explaining in the literature?
There are, yes. So what we've created and what I took screenshots of is we created a story map where you can kind of scroll through and it'll change the pictures and talk you through each of the sections. And at the end of that story map, I've created a little YouTube video that's a couple minutes that walks you through how to navigate the different parts of the map. It's not something that was intuitive to me, and I feel pretty comfortable with computers, so we thought it might be helpful to just have that video. It's at the bottom of the story map, along with the link to the interactive map. So hopefully all three of those tools together is helpful, but if you ever have questions, we're always available to help as well.
I'm also happy to share out this presentation. So that North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services has maps that are similar to this, but just a little bit different information. Is this, are they intended to overlap in a line, or are they just done completely separately?
They're done completely separate, and it had to do with the source of the data and the timing of the data and what we could internally take in and be able to make our own. So yes, there are several. I want to say, I think Land of Sky has some similar maps, but again, slightly different. And so the angle of that we took on this was to link it to our strategic plan. And then hopefully, our partners in the community would be able to utilize it as well. Okay, so what I can do here is I can zoom in. There are plus and minus signs down here, bottom right corner of the screen. I can also take a look at the layers, which shows me what we have turned on. I mentioned the zip code layer. Let me zoom back out a little bit so you can see it, which overlays the zip codes outlined in red. This base layer includes actual redlining data, percent of the block group that is Black or African American, percent of that block group that's Hispanic or Latino. And then additionally, on all of these tabs, you can toggle the community index layer on and off, so you can just see county alone with percent of Hispanic, etc. I mentioned the tabs across the bottom with the strategic focus areas. So you can see those here. The other data that we've included, which it's cut off a little bit on the sharing screen, but at the bottom, we've included the county's median household income as well as the county's average gross rent as percent of income. So for example, I could click on an area here and I can do a comparison. I could say, okay, this block group, the median household income is $64,000, so it's higher than the county's median household income. And start diving into understanding, see, I think I clicked on, I'll click on a darker gray. You can start doing a comparison to understand what factors probably attribute to that higher ranking on the community index. So I could see on this one that I just selected, the median household income is $29,190, which is significantly lower than the $53,900. That's the county's median household income. Other factors I can take a look at are the percent below poverty. I mentioned these, the population under 18 or over 65, et cetera. We also have languages in here. I found it interesting to look at the different block groups within the county and identify those that are more predominantly speaking Spanish households. And you know, for example, that could be used to try to figure out communication. Like, are we tackling communication in the right manner when we reach out to people in that area of our community? What other questions do you all have, or where else would you like me to navigate on this map?
This is new. This is a new product. Yeah. Okay.
Fairly new. So we presented to commissioners, I believe, in May of this year. And we are hoping to have it published out on the county site. We're in the process of getting it out there so that everyone can navigate to it. But it's not private information.
Right.
We have public links, and we just need to get it published to the website.
Is there a cadence for, well, I guess it would depend on census? Is the update cadence for it, or?
Great question. So since this was pulled together, we have new census data that has not been incorporated yet. My hope is that we will have it updated by the end of this calendar year, although it's sneaking up quickly.
This is fantastic. So thank you. Margaret?
Yeah, thank you. It is really fascinating. I would encourage anyone that has the time to dive in and look at these details and start playing around with the map. You can't break it, at least not as far as I know you can. But some other neat things that you can do, let's see if I can do it with this picture, is, you know, we have the community rank. So how, we have all the numbers of how these block groups ranked with those 9 census factors. And so I can click anywhere along that little graph to the right, and it'll take me to that block group and zoom in on it. And then I can do the same with household income. So if I want to find those areas within Buncombe County that have the higher household incomes, I can click up on the higher end of the scale, or you know, inversely on the lower end of the scale, and it'll zoom in and show me where they are in Buncombe County. Pretty fascinating. And so the hope is that people can start using it for making decisions. What populations do we want to impact, and are we actually getting to the right areas and providing them the services that we believe they need?
Just like, I'm thinking, what is the Biltmore House? Does that like skew our numbers? Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
so you can see where that
That doesn't count.
So I totally get the value of this and being able to zoom in different areas and pull the specific data. Where I'm still struggling a little bit is in the overall initial map. And sorry, what's the language used for that first map, the block group? Block group, yes. So how are the 9 factors chosen? Are they equally weighted? And what's the reasoning behind it?
hopefully I can answer all those questions. So I did not alone build this map. I will disclose that. So they were chosen, we did look to other, we are not the only community across the United States that has built something like this, right? So we looked at several other states have utilized it, other counties. There are other counties within North Carolina that have done something similar. And so we looked at the factors that they pulled in and then tried to decide what aligned best to the community that we know, as well as the goals that we're trying to achieve. And so we landed on those 9 as being those factors. I think we originally came up with a wish list and we couldn't find everything we wanted on our wish list. And so for some areas we had to make do. I think I had mentioned the healthcare. We wanted to see, I think we wanted to see more in healthcare data, but we simply don't have it from American Community Survey data. We also talked through, well, maybe we could pull that data from somewhere else, but quite frankly, it becomes a tad bit cumbersome to pull from varying sources and try to create that ranking. You had asked about weighting, and I don't believe they are all weighted equally, but I cannot remember, so I'd have to get back to you on that answer. And then we have one other question.
I'm not sure what the other question was, but so for example, let's use the demographics. There are two of the 9 factors are demographic, below 18 and above 65. I have it on my phone, but I'm looking at my phone, I'm not texting. So, and I assume that's because people under 18 or people above 65 had greater need for certain services.
Correct.
But then that intersects with some of the other factors. So that's why the weighting comes in just a little confused. I totally get the map and the way that, but the overall picture, which has some importance because that's like the initial entry point, right?
Right.
That's a map being presented to community, as it's shared to community. Like, I'm having trouble getting my head wrapped around it and the meaning of it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. And so why would we select
Yeah.
under 18 and
Yeah,
over
because you can
65?
shift factors
Yeah.
and the colors would shift around some. So
Yeah.
if this has consequence for how that plays out.
It does, it certainly does. And
And race is not among these, for example, right? We have age, but we don't have race. You mentioned, of course, we can get race.
but we
That's not
can't
part of
rank
the
it.
initial picture.
Correct. Because that makes an assumption, right, that we would assume, it makes assumptions that we would assume someone of a particular race requires more resources than someone else, and we can't make that assumption. But what we do know is that people under the age of 18 and over 65 absolutely require more resources in different ways. And so that was where this idea was born. My colleague that assisted me in building this pulled something similar together for emergency services and was able to figure out the factors that assisted emergency services in determining where resources were needed in the community. And so we started with, how do we find those pockets? Like, what factors would help us find those pockets where resources are needed more than others?
Are you using any other standard risk adjustment with community tools like area reclamation index or anything like that?
So the reason I'm kind of stuck is because some of this is counterintuitive to me. So across the country, as older populations actually have more wealth than younger populations, that it's often skewing. But so it could be the case that in areas with greater concentrations of older people, that actually there's a greater concentration of wealth as well. So like why that was chosen instead of something like race, which understood what you said, but also has equity implications. Like county has a very explicit open equity. These were, I just want to understand the objective reason. Like, I'm not trying to put all behind the selection of factors when they could have been different and would have shifted the color map.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can answer that question.
It's not for the overall map.
Yeah.
It's that you start off with this, with the blocks. That's my concern about it, just to be honest.
With the,
With this overall picture that's really a depiction of need, right? And those factors that have contributed to that depiction of need, those were, I want to find out, I want to know how objective they were determined, like based on what standard, or if they're subjective, and the colors could have shifted.
Sure, that makes sense. And, you know, another thought is just by looking at the colors alone doesn't tell you the whole picture, right? And I think that's some of where you're trying to get to is like, you really have to dig into the details. And if you do dig into the details, you can see, oh, well, you know, this block group that's dark gray is not like the other block group over here that's dark gray. They have very different needs. One may have, you know, a higher poverty rate. The other may have, you know, a higher aging population. So very different needs in the community. I think pulling all those factors together, the hope was that it gave us as wide of a view as we could with the data that we had of the community and varying needs that might exist. But yes, I'm sure I know that there are many other factors we could have included that are not here.
I want to make sure that I'm not dominating the conversations. I started turning back, I turned back over to Kate, so she can tell me to be quiet.
Not at all. Good questions. I appreciate it.
So just the final point would be, my takeaway from that, for me, if I was making a personal recommendation, having nothing to do with the committee, is in fact, that you shouldn't enter into this block. It's biasing how we're receiving data. Instead, just have the data available so we can look at it through different prisms and choose those.
Okay.
Because the blocks you can manipulate those ones you're selecting.
These state comparisons, or, I mean, but it's not in this map, right? That you
Not
can't
in this
do.
map, no.
So I want to be mindful of our time and thank you so much, Heather, for walking us through that and sharing the different ways we can use this map. And like I said, I will share this presentation out with the committee so that you can kind of look through it. I know it's small on the screen, but I also encourage everyone to kind of get in there and play around a bit. But the purpose for this at this meeting is to see how this committee might be able to utilize this tool or resource, if at all, as we're looking at geographic data that we know is something that is important in this committee's work, and sharing the impact of the work from the Strategic Partnership Grant Program, and something that we have been kind of trying to build out more comprehensively or thoroughly, but has been a bit of a challenge to like accurately depict what we're looking at there and what we're seeing. So I know last year we had a couple different questions in the application that we included about geographic data. One question was about the location of a provider or location of a awardee. And that was basically like the physical location where their main office or operation was. Also asked a question about location of their service recipients. And that was a very broad question in which we got a lot of different types of information. As you can imagine, if a school is doing a project, or if the Oakland County Schools Foundation is doing a project in the community, they're going to be at many, many different schools. If an organization is physically located in one spot, but their service recipients are all over the county, how do we reflect that? And how do we then determine from the data that we are asking for if we're fulfilling the need of this program? Are we getting to the communities that need to be served? Are we getting the word out to folks in the right ways? what is the impact of that work? Where do we need to be more targeted in some of our work? So that is why we asked Heather to come and share this map and share it as a possible tool, but also want to have conversations about what the committee's thoughts are around that process, that particular goal. In terms of throughout the grant process, we have the application, so we have the questions that can be included there to glean information. We have the evaluation process, the scoring matrix, and then we have the funding recommendations. So kind of 3 different parts of this process that we can really be looking at in terms of how we're seeing this data or asking for this data. So with all of that, I want to turn it over to folks to see if you have any initial thoughts, having participated in the process before, possibly being a new participant to the process, where we might be able to really kind of hone in and actually get to what we're looking for. Can this tool be helpful?
Have the commissioners given any insight on the previous years, all of the presentations that this committee's done? Have they given any insight into what they want, or they feel like it's needing some change or needing more eyes or needing, have they given any feedback to you?
Rachel, you want to speak to that?
It certainly has been a theme of questions and feedback from commissioners who have a focus on all of the county to not have services overly concentrated in one portion of the county. With this tool, staff was thinking it might give us another way to look at services compared to index that imperfectly, but gives us some indication of like concentration of needs / lack of access to resources. So it has been a theme, although there haven't been any specific requests from commissioners.
Perspectives.
The more specific request is when we do our presentation to commissioners to show the work that's been done over the past year. They ask to see this data each year. And we want to be able to present it as thoroughly and correctly as possible.
So we would propose to keep the address question on the application, but improve it slightly from what is your primary service location to allow them to give multiple addresses, because we got some of that last year where services were maybe at a set of different schools. So keep that for the purpose of being able to map the data either pre-recommendation or post-recommendation or both. We could also use this map as a layer to put the dots over to see where service locations are in comparison to those concentrations. Another idea that came up was to actually type in the addresses, which the map gives a way to do, and find out what the equity index score is for the site. Look at the, as another piece of information, maybe not in the scoring tool, but to just see, like we do on balance between education, well-being, economy, look at how our blend of projects are in terms of equity score. Another
That
idea.
seems doable though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty doable.
Another idea, just to throw it out there, we brainstormed pre-meeting, was to put a question on the application asking the applicant, how does their project support populations with lack access to resources, and give them a link to the map so they can look it up and learn about it, use it as a source of information to answer that question. Whether or not we rank and score their answer to that question is open for discussion, but we can indicate that it's a priority to us to cater services to where the needs are using data by having a question. So those are a few ideas that you didn't directly ask me to throw out there, but they're taking the liberty
One of the other ideas is in the, after everything is scored and reviewed and discussions about funding recommendations are being had, using this map to then look at some of the projects that the committee has identified to see where they're landing on the index map to help with those determinations.
I like the idea of having them have access to the map and asking that question. I don't know that it would be a scorable question, but I think that it's important information they can provide. And it may be that we get to a point where we say it's a scorable question, but at first it would be good just to see the data and try to figure out what's best in the scoring model.
Well, it may help point out their innovation as well,
Yes.
and help them be able to do their share of problem solving.
So for human service organizations who are using Insecure 360, there will be a future being able to apply data. I don't know yet, but maybe next year. So that would be interesting to see.
I want to be last.
Oh, okay. Who else has an idea or reaction or comment?
I think the map is helpful and identifying the data that's presented. The conversation has come up about outreach. The discussion has come up about the registry of 501c3s that exist within the county, and whether or not that exists and is available. Sort of overlay with the map like this, so that we can, better identify organizations for outreach.
I admit to being a data nerd, but the thing that I think all of us have to do is a little bit of homework on these blocks, because I think we can pull out good data that if we really dig into this map, it may not be all the data that we need or want, and it may be flawed or it may be perfect, but I think that, one of the things that I hate to admit I look forward to is digging into this and really looking at what's underneath all the stuff that we saw today in Heather's presentation. Because I think there is some good data.
Thank you so much. It's very informative. I've had the fortunate to live here most of my life, so over 60 years. And looking at those blocks, they very much correlate to areas of the county. I mean, there you can see Broad River and Emma and Alexander, Newfound. I mean, it basically is the same as those areas officially or unofficially called. And I think one of the directives from the commissioners was, geographic areas. And since I've been on this committee, I've tried to be an advocate for some of the sort of the outlying areas, such as Sandy Marsh and such as that. There's not many of them. We don't get many applications from those areas. So what few did come, I always try to be an advocate for. I think we did one for Martinsville, the community center up there, which really, they sort of fizzled out. But I don't know what you can really do about that. Other than somehow encourage them to apply for help.
And this does not take into account population density, which is often where new services tend to be located, where more people can access them.
Is that something that we might see in the future?
Don't know.
I do feel like homework, at least on my part, because I missed the presentation. However, I've seen that before. there's homework that does need to be done, and like Doug talked about, the different areas, sending much and such, it's just, unfamiliar territory for me. And to be able to play around with this tool to see, you know, the, percentages or where, or the outcomes of what we, when we score these grants, will best guide us and support us in what's happening in that area or what's already been done there. I would, like you said, I think it'd be great to add to the application to have the individual agencies to be able to provide that information for us. And yeah, I was trying to get out of homework, but at the same time, I think it's important for us to look more into it.
Well, in the segue onto that, I don't remember verbatim what you said, Rachel, but you phrased it better than I'm about to. Putting a scoreable question in the application, how do your services meet the resource needs of your area? And that's a great question, and I don't think it's captured in the application. And that topic came up last year that some of the questions on the application weight themselves more towards other areas in the strategic partnership plan. Simply as a result of the language, the environmental groups don't have that heartfelt language or emotional language. Some other things that you might have. So.
And we were listening in the last brainstorm, and we're gonna come back with the proposed set of application questions that reflect that. I know we talked about scoring need makes basic needs like automatically get prioritized. So thinking about it from the perspective of access to resources makes it a little balanced maybe.
So this is a really interesting conversation, lots of great feedback. I think the map helps us more than anything in terms of outreach and recognizing places where, but, I have a strong but, and then maybe for the commissioners more than for this committee. Geographic versus need. Geographic doesn't necessarily align with need. There could be greater need in certain parts of the county. That does not reflect an even geography throughout the county. Also, what Rachel said correctly in terms of population varies through the county. To me, good work is good work. And if the same project in two different places and one's gonna help a lot more people, I wanna fund that rather than the other one, just before the number of people funded. I'm concerned about geographic bias. That helps us that informs our outreach. But ultimately, when scoring a project, let's say two like projects, I'm gonna score higher the one that will serve more people, not the one that needs a geographic checklist for commissioners. I'm also curious about county, the county's not that big, county-wide projects. So we had a site visit, Sarah was there, I forget Rachel, Sarah was there at Help-Me, and I think Help-Me serves the entire county. So if we put the bubble on the map at that office, even if they have other offices, like how do we think about that? If the entire county is served, really we should be coloring the entire county. I feel like we're failing at that. We're saying, okay, organizations that do serve the entire county are making it seem like they don't by putting on bubbles. So we need to capture organizations that do countywide well or do larger geographies well and not just focus on location. But then the main point being, I know in my scoring, I'll put the amount of people being touched and lives being affected and impact being had, pardon me. And that goes to also what Mark said, the bias against environmental things. But we can't really tell that we have a bias there because we don't get a lot of applications. So that goes to outreach. If we got equal applications and then it was disproportionately fewer grants to environmental, then we can look at how we're scoring. Until we're remotely close to that, I think it's harder to say the system's biased because we're not even getting the applications that we might, as a committee, just be able to get past that, right, in how we score.
And to that point, that's a conflict for me because, statistically, I don't know, are we getting equal number of applicants from environmental groups. I don't know the whole number of groups out there.
And I think we do know that, and staff has reported on that, we're getting fewer applications in that of the 4 focal areas from environmental, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, but I don't know how many organizations in the community.
Yeah, how does that look?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's
What
there
our
too.
penetration rate
Yeah.
would look like.
And also the correction that we've talked about already, that organizations should be able to go across more than one category rather than just choose one category. I think that's been a limiter as well.
It's complicated.
Well,
It is. Good luck with that.
some of the challenge that you're speaking to, I mean, what we don't have is the downstream data, like you mentioned, we don't have that. We don't have the education level completion data, but there is that data, it's just marrying those maps is not something simple, but I mean, there are maps where you can get some of that. That may be more helpful to know where you have a higher disease burden or higher, because then that is more of the downstream impact of those demographics.
And I think if I'm an organization making an application for a lesser area, that's part of my application. Like, we don't have the service here. Make up the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Which and actually is a lot. But there are other concentrations, Emma is a large Latino teen population. There are other areas with larger populations, and most of a plurality of the organizations are actually in Emma. So if you're in a different organization making that claim, would impact my scoring of things.
We have a place in the application where the applicants are asked to give us data, qualitative, quantitative data, explaining the need for the project, which sort of makes the case. And depending on their specialty, if it's a health project versus an education project versus an environmental energy project, they're probably going to need to data sources that we can just scratch the description surface.
Do we have 211 data? Don't they capture data like domestic violence calls and calls for transportation? And they collect, don't they collect addresses? Do they rate in those?
We can reach out. Yeah, that could be really.
And while I find that really interesting for our work, I find that more interesting we're giving out to community, so organizations know where they need to be.
Right,
their
exactly, yeah,
resources.
right, exactly.
And then that becomes part of their proposal to
Yeah.
us.
So I'm hearing that there's interest in utilizing this tool as part of the application process, but not having it be a scored component, more of a educational tool, something that, another resource that we can pull on. Does that sound right?
Proactively make it available to applicants, that this is available if you're trying to frame need in a context. You could use this tool to inform that frame.
I also heard your point, Ray, about how do we show or communicate, translate organizations that serve all of Buncombe County versus those that are serving very specific locations. I think that has been part of the challenge with this. And something that we tried to hone in on last year, and it was imperfect.
That looked great though.
It's a lot of back end work on staff's part. But I do think that would be interesting to see like a layer of like these organizations serve all of this geographic region versus pinpoint where services are provided for others.
And regionally as well, I did a site visit with one. I went to, they support regionally. And that's an even bigger, how do we narrow down what's just Buncombe County versus, the region, which.
And if they select the region from the area that they serve, then you could create that.
We tried to get to yet another nuance by asking not just where they serve, but where their service recipients. If this has been an ongoing project reside, because we've seen groups just say, we're open to everyone, but that isn't necessarily where the concentration is. But what we got back was so different case by case, it was hard to summarize.
Do you think people could, if we sent them a map, say, hey, we serve these different areas? I don't know how accurate it would be. Depends on.
You know, if they're tracking client data at any level, i.e. address, you know, they can tell us.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea to make that information available. And I'm interested in how the question will be answered. Point us toward, this has been a real evolution here. So. It's changed year by year. So I think asking the question is a good first step toward how can we utilize these information in the future.
And as a result-oriented person, I have to remind myself that a lot of the magic and beauty here comes from the process, from the discussion, from paying attention to this and talking about it, rather than trying to find the perfect solution.
Yeah, there's no I think we continue to make it better, but I think we'll always be trying to improve it, for sure. And as the faces and names change, we get more perspective, more perspective.
Another benefit of self-reporting from the applicants is it's, you know, highlighting a map or writing a description is, when the conversation comes with the commissioners, you want to know, what about my district? Here's the back and forth, here's the data given, the data received is reciprocal. They provided us with information, we provided them with information. A level of transparency. The needs are being communicated. How do we solve the problem of meeting your geographical desires? The question may be this way.
And speaking of more information, we are getting ready to come back to you next month with more map information. Do you want to do the segue for next, Sarah?
Sure.
What's on my mind?
So we deemed this the learning opportunity portion of this funding cycle. So I hope that this is helpful and useful information to everyone. Next month, we are going to have two different presentations that overlap and align. One on our most recent comprehensive plan that was passed this year, which is a long-range plan and something very interesting to look at as we're trying to identify the needs in our community and what kind of focus areas we're really looking to dig into with our work. The other is a presentation on our current strategic plan, which I think is another really important thing, that this committee has a communal understanding of what that looks like. And there's quite a bit involved there, and has a lot of reach into the Racial Equity Action Plan, the comprehensive plan, our grant funding priorities, things of that nature. So we'll be hearing from two different departments on those two things, and hopefully that'll give even more context.
It's very governmental, but the comprehensive plan is that look at land use and growth. So what do we need to plan for schools and emergency service locations and zoning rules and land conservation, transportation. They look to that long-range comprehensive plan. And the strategic plan is where we got those four focus areas that we use for grants.
this?
But no, you have that, please.
I'm curious how the county, I mean, obviously we're talking about the county strategic plan, how do we see their role in the region? It's like, I mean, most of the things we talk about, we don't function in isolation. And the surrounding counties have a big impact on.
It's such a smart question because it goes to what Kathy said, right, about regional. And I'm sitting here thinking, you know, actually, if you frame it in terms of region, then we're like, what are we using county money for? It's beyond region.
Yeah.
And is that okay? And it's
Yeah.
probably not in terms of how you frame things on an application for a county grant. But of course, you're absolutely right. Like, and it's holistic than that.
You know, that public health and all.
Certainly the largest county within the western region. And the next layer out that we do a lot of work in is the 4-county region of Buncombe, Madison, Henderson, and Transylvania, which is the Council of Government and Described Regional Council region. But I also know, if you look at health, all these various state agencies, they divided mental health as a different set of footprint regions. So making sure that we're not acting in isolation is important, and making sure that our funding is benefiting within both is also important.
And Dogwood and Via, like every grouping is different, of course. I had a question that I think staff has answered, but I'd like to ask it again anyway, about how we collect information from grantees and then organizations that did not get a grant about our process from grantees. And you know, site visits, I never asked this and I should. Like, what do you find challenging, good, problematic about our process? And so I'm sure you do that already because I remember at some point talking about it. But that should also be part of what's informing some of our choices about how we're doing this program, is how accessible it is, how doable it is. Is it too cumbersome? Is it not too cumbersome? Do they need more help from staff? Like, what does that look like? And then especially from organizations, if they're willing to, and I don't know what that looks like for the county, who didn't get grants, who applied, and ideally to put it out there for like, well, why aren't you applying? Like, you know, I'm also on the tipping point. The tipping point is $5,000. I've heard from organizations that apply for other county grants, it's just not worth your time, right? And we might not get it anyway, and it's $5,000. But you know, that extends to every county program and the family of county programs even. So I'd love to just over time make sure that's a commitment to get a feedback from organizations that have applied, whether or not they received it, that's meaningful and true feedback, not under threat.
Yeah, I can speak to that really quickly. This past year, as you all might remember, we contracted with Nancy Bacon Consulting to help with some of these exact questions. Where can we improve in our process? Where are there gaps or snags? What are some of the hardships or challenges that nonprofits are seeing in applying or managing public funds? And we read the survey. We had focus groups for both folks who applied and received funding, folks who applied to not receive funding. And we got some really good information, and based on that information, we've really been trying to use that to make our process more equitable, more accessible, provide resources, tools, materials, connections to nonprofit organizations, whether they were funded or not, to help them kind of get to a place where if they want to apply for government funding, public funding, or whatever else funding, they feel like they have what they need to be able to do that successfully.
That's very helpful. And I know you've talked about this before, so I apologize for it.
I know it's a big one.
But it's also that might make me, when I'm judging things, like I'm being kind of fair. I'm recognizing, oh, this section is actually a section which organizations have difficulty with. So I'm not holding everyone to the exact same strict standard of a professional grant writer doing it in a certain way, or at least I have more empathy for that variation.
And I think that's certainly something that we can discuss more as a committee, moving into the next funding cycle, and those potentially implicit biases or how we're looking at application questions and potentially weighing the way that we're coming into it. But yeah, it's a great thing to think about. So. Great time. Anything else before we wrap up? Next month, we're back to our regular 1.5 hour time slot. We're gonna have some presenters for you, so please do attend. And we'll get the presentation out to everybody.
I was trying to foist it back over to Kate, but does anyone else have anything else they'd like to comment or bring up before we adjourn?